Hello, YouTube. One of the secrets of social stability in the Soviet Union was the strict filtering of information available to the population by the authorities. Even natural disasters were hushed up, which it would seem had nothing to do with the socio-political agenda, but they were hushed up. That I remember. Well, when one of the largest earthquakes in the history of the USSR occurred in Tajikistan in the summer of 1949, most residents of the country did not know about it. It looked like two mountain ranges that converged. So, on July 10, 1949, the large village of Hait in the Tajik Soviet Socialist Republic and dozens of small villages in the Kara-Tegin Valley disappeared from the face of the earth. Before the disaster, Hait had 10,000 inhabitants. The premonitions of the tragedy began to manifest a couple of days before the main shock. On July 8, the valley of the Yasman River was shaken by powerful foreshocks. Animals also tried to warn people. Anticipating trouble, cats, dogs, and donkeys behaved restlessly. They rushed about and yelled, screamed, shouted. And in the regional center of Garm on the eve of the earthquake, on July 9, it was heard how the earth was humming. Despite the ominous signs, only a few people left Hait, and as it turned out, in vain. On July 10, the Kara-Tegin Valley began to move. The epicenter of the earthquake was at the depth of 20 kilometers. According to today's estimates, the magnitude of the tremors was 7.5, and the intensity was 10 points. It was equivalent to the explosion of a 40 megaton hydrogen bomb. The residents of Hait could not stand on their feet. It seemed to them as if the earth had been pulled out from under their feet like a carpet. On the roads, cars were thrown into the air, for example. Also, the passengers of the car traveling between Hait and Sairona were simply thrown out of the vehicle. Buildings collapsed in villages and dust covered the neighborhood. According to the recollections of witnesses, it became dark as night. Hundreds of people became victims of the first phase of the earthquake. But the most terrible thing awaited the inhabitants of the valley a little later. Powerful aftershocks destroyed the Chokhrak mountain. The ground was wet as there had been a downpour the other day. In addition, water gushed down from the lakes of the Obidara Hauz Gorge. The mixing of masses of water and rocks caused such a unique phenomenon as the earth avalanche. It cannot be attributed in its pure form to either the landslides, consisting of solid soil, or to mud flows, mainly liquid streams. The height of the wave was 100 to 150 meters. The width reached 1 kilometer. From the most powerful movement of rocks, a hurricane wind rose up, which tore up trees with roots. The city, Hait, now it's in the Tajikabad district. The Hatlon region of Tajikistan was once a busy settlement with a bustling bazaar, mosques, and caravanserai. Hait was located 190 kilometers from Dushanbe. In the area itself, more than 60,000 people lived. At one point, there was absolutely nothing left of the surrounding area and of the city itself. The stone collapse moved at the speed of 100 to 110 kilometers an hour, past at least 7 kilometers, and the earthen tongues stretched another 4 to 5 kilometers into the Yarkich Valley, where the already destroyed remains of the villages were filled up. The total value of mud stone mass with the loss deposits from the side slopes is estimated at 400 to 500,000, according to Andrei Nikonov, doctor of geological and mineralogical sciences. Loess is a classic, predominantly silt-sized sediment that is formed by the accumulation of wind-blown dust. 10% of Earth's land area is covered by loess or similar deposits. Well, this total area of destruction in the territory around Hait was 500 square kilometers. 33 settlements were destroyed. At least 25,000 people were killed. According to other estimates, up to 40,000 people. Even in Garma, houses were partially destroyed and people slept in tents. Aftershocks after the main earthquake were felt until July 14. The Central or Main Republic newspaper, Communist of Tajikistan, for July 15, 1949, published this message from the Tajik Telegraph Agency. During July 8 and 10, two strong earthquakes occurred in Tajikistan with an epicenter in the mountains at a distance of 190 kilometers northeast of the city of Stalinabad. Several tremors were observed in Stalinabad. The strongest, by a force of 6.5 points, was felt on July 10 at 9:43. There was no destruction in the city. Repeated, weaker tremors, as is usually the case after the earthquakes, lasted for several days. On July 12, the tremors were much weaker than on July 11. On July 13 and 14, further attenuations took place. See, they didn't change from 1989 to the times of Chernobyl. That's what the socialist motherland was known for. Continuous lies. I know because Chernobyl took place in the land where I was born, and I wasn't there at the time, but I lost relatives in that tragedy too. It's continuous lies, and this is what you get when you get socialism in your country. Remember it. You can ask people from Vietnam, Cuba, former Soviet Union. They'll tell you. New York Times will not, but we will. Anyway, the USSR authorities tried their best to save people from the rubble. The military of the 201st Division were sent to the mountains. Sanitary aviation were actually sent from Russia as part of the Soviet Union and were used on a large scale. The surviving residents were relocated to the Vaksh Valley, but the entire rescue operation was carried out in an atmosphere of the utmost secrecy. However, it was difficult to hide what happened in Tajikistan. Aftershocks of magnitude 6.5 were felt on July 10 in the capital of the republic, Stalinabad. Now it's known as Dushanbe. On July 15, the newspaper Communist of Tajikistan gave extremely sparse information about the two earthquakes in the mountains. No casualties or damage were reported. The details of the incident were covered with military secrecy. This was confirmed by a local resident, Iskandar, who personally visited the place where Hait stood once. He said that he came in the evening, but there is no city, just rocks and earth. He didn't recognize anything. The river flows completely different. There are no houses, no horses, no yaks, no trees. There aren't even any birds, he said. Iskandar was given a non-disclosure agreement to sign by the Soviet police. Not a single word about the disaster was mentioned by the central media. This was partly explained by the fact that 9 months before the Hait earthquake, the catastrophic Ashgabat earthquake took place. But the main reason was something else. 1949 was the year of Joseph Stalin's 70th anniversary. And, as they said, culmination of the cult of personality. Yeah, and when after Stalin died, we didn't have much news about other disasters in the Soviet Union. I well remember one in Kiev when I was a little boy in the early 1960s, but that's a different story. They were trying to cover up, Nazi horrors, destruction of Jews and other people, and Babi Yar, and they covered up it so well that we had flooding in Kiev, and I remember people trying to be rescued in boats on the city streets. Anyway, it is enough to open the Moscow press for the July days of 1949 to be convinced of the existence of strict censorship at that time. The newspaper pages were filled with all sorts of small anniversaries and appeals of leading men of the national economy to Joseph Stalin. Only positive news was allowed from Tajikistan. On July 15, for example, the newspaper Izvestia published a bootlicking article from Stalinabad under the heading "At the Tajik University." It was dedicated to the end of the academic year. Against the background of people's happiness under the rule of Comrade Stalin, the news about a natural disaster, as they would say today, did not fit into the format. But the tragedy was not forgotten. In 1970, in the memory of the earthquake in Tajikistan, the monument Grieving Mother by sculptor Kirei Zhumanin was erected there. Listen to some of the reports from the witnesses of the disaster. This is Kasim Gazimbekov. He was a survivor of the tragedy. People tried to get up to run away, but they fell down. Many died swallowed up by deep cracks formed as a result of the disaster. In addition to those killed by the landslide, there were many dead in the surrounding villages. Many people were caught in trouble in their homes, remaining under the ruins. After the earthquake, the water that had gathered at the top broke through. The river began to wash away part of the land with corpses. Many left, but some returned a year later. Here's recollections of Lyubov Meschi. She's not a witness or an eyewitness, but she's a listener of that terrible earthquake of 1949. Lyubov was 16 years old. She lived in the then regional center of Garm, next to the Surghob River, where the ridge of Peter the Great rises. And behind the ridge is the unfortunate town of Hayit, which disappeared forever, buried along with all the nearby villages. In their Garm, since July 9, they could hear, that's why she said she's a listener, they could hear the earth humming, and this hum drove them crazy, did not let them sleep, and instilled a terrible, hopeless despair. Military families lived in tents in the yard of the military enlistment office. She said lived is not the correct word to describe it. And they, lying on a nightmare spread, lying on a blanket spread out on the ground, clinging to it, were simply filled with horror from this hum, fearing that the mountain towering over their village, from which people expected betrayal and attack, would slide down and bury them all. The next day, hundreds of Studebaker vehicles, both day and night, raced non-stop past their Garm, rushing to help in the Hayit area with the military from the 201st Division. Day and night, there was a roar of ambulance airplanes in the sky. Lyubov's father, Lieutenant Colonel of the Garm military enlistment office, immediately left for Hayit when the news came that the district military enlistment office collapsed from the very first tremors. It was still the beginning of the apocalypse, she said. Her father told Lyubov something terrible. The earth split under his feet, the cracks diverged, and people fell into the cracks. And then these cracks closed treacherously. As a military man, her father tried to hold on, but it knocked him down mercilessly. The catastrophe was such that almost the entire population of both Hait and nearby villages perished. 2 regions converged, and that's it. The father survived. He brought photos from this hell. Lyubov has 5 of them, right from the scene. Her father told her that the rooster is the only creature left alive in one of the villages where everything was buried forever. This rooster was standing on the crest of a terrible ridge of rocks and sand, and all the time it was shouting. No, it wasn't crowd. It was screaming terribly. It seemed that the rooster was flapping his wings in despair, like hands on its hips. That's what Lyubov's father said. It was scary to see hundreds of trees whose prostrate roots in the same ridge looked up in the sky. Yes, there is no Hait on the current maps, but once it was. Remember this, she said, do not forget. This is now recollection of Fazlidin Rahimov, chairman of the Council of War and Labor Veterans of the Jamaat of Hait. He was a survivor of the tragedy. It was a very scary time. Before they had time to recover from the first earthquake, a second, much more terrible one happened a day later. The earth was shaking, everything was collapsing. They tried to run, but they fell down. People repeated the prayer in horror. There were many deaths before their eyes. There were also amazing cases. So, from the very center of Hait, after a landslide, a child in gahvor, or cradle, was thrown in the surhob by the water. It was a boy. He was then pulled out of the water in the Kalaylayob area. He was alive and well. There was still a man alive. He climbed the tree and held on tightly to it, and was also thrown out by the landslide. The Hait earthquake of July 10, 1949, was recovered by virtually all seismic stations in the world. The time, place, and power of the earthquake were determined with sufficient accuracy, even in South America. So I wanted to let you know about this. I mean, I've lived through an earthquake. Thank God it wasn't so powerful, and I hope we don't have any more earthquakes like that. But you know what recently happened in 2023 in Turkey and Syria, and it's such a tragedy. Always be prepared. That's all I can tell you. I already mentioned what happened to me, and the flashlight that I think helped me save my daughter's life during the earthquake. She was a little baby at the time. And always have water. Try to have food rations. Know where things are kept. Try to be prepared. Unfortunately, we have earthquakes all over the planet, and I think quite frequent ones in the last few months. Thank you for your attention to my work.